So let's go into crypto assets now. As people who know me, I talk about Bitcoin a lot. I'm on the Bitcoin group on the World Crypto Network, where this is video is going.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen me on there, but just for people who maybe are watching this and don't know, Bitcoin was created about 8 years ago, and it's a way of a decentralized property platform. Basically, it's an asset of its own, sort of like money, but it also could be used for many other purposes. It's the first time, as Vinay has many times pointed out, it's the first time we had a sort of distributed database where everyone agreed on the state, where everyone agreed on what, and the first app for that is money. It's as the most obvious choice. So when did you first learn about Bitcoin, and has Bitcoin's trajectory surprised you?
I guess it must have been 2011 or 2012. I think it was shortly before it climbed to about $30 and then fell back to $4.
That's 2011.
2011. So I went around then and told all my friends, look, I don't do speculative finance, right? I just don't invest in things for the sake of making money on them unless I'm personally involved. Just don't do that. I don't know what I was thinking. I've really changed my mind about that. But anyway, you inherit a 6,000-year-old system of meditation, and a bunch of old moral code stuff comes along with it. And then it takes you a while to figure out what you want to keep and what you want to throw. So, desperate conditions, desperate rules, desperate measures, maybe trade is okay. So I get into this position of just telling all my friends, you ought to buy this stuff because it's probably going to go all the way. I recognize the signs that this is a game-changing technology, tell a bunch of people about it, and then go back to totally ignoring it. And I don't really stick my head back above the radar until I hear the term smart contract. And it's like, oh, smart contract. I have not heard this term since the 1990s. It is time for the crypto Jedi to return. So, Obi-Wan Kenobi in the form of Ian Grigg comes out of retirement. I mean, not that Ian ever really retired, but he goes from obscurity to fame again as everybody begins to catch up with, like, wow, this smart contract thing is important. What the heck is the name of the guy that actually invented the smart contract originally? His name is immediately escaping me.
Yes. Nick Szabo?
Of course, Nick Szabo. That's exactly who we mean.
Oh my God, this guy's an absolute genius. He's still at it these days. His blog is incredible.
Yeah. Oh my God, right, exactly. So, Szabo and Greg and the rest of those guys kind of come out of the woodwork. I had always been around that crowd. Like, I'd watch them talking to each other on mailing lists and all the rest of it. I hadn't really done much. Kind of, sort of. I mean, I did write some software in those days, but it was not by any means pivotal to the story. And then, the names come back out, and it's like, I actually understand this stuff. I've written systems that do this kind of. Never got to production. That's okay. And then the entire thing is back, and it's like, wow, it's the 1990s all over again. Look, it's the crypto guys, and that's good enough. Like, okay, it's time. Let's do this. And here we are.
You've said some of the things you've said about it. You said there's a gap between the libertarian hard property inside and the open source cypherpunk anarchist context, and that this libertarian hard property inside is a vulnerability, and that Bitcoin is crap technology that must be fixed. What can you describe that vulnerability? What is the vulnerability?
Okay, so Bitcoin implements an essentially libertarian property rights system inside of it. Finality of settlement, unhackable, free association, anonymity, all the rest of this kind of stuff. It's a really good fit for libertarian politics. However, if it was a libertarian technology all the way through, there would be a property right to maintain and operate the system.
At the highest level, you mean?
At the highest level, there would be a property right, and that would be the right to implement the new version and then push people to the new version or whatever it was going to be, right? But there would be a system of property rights that created the centralized point that you needed for the foundation, that you needed for updates, you needed for whatever it happened to be, right? Or if it was going to be decentralized, it would be a decentralized system of property rights, but there would be a political right system at the top level that would be ironclad, clearly defined, and managed by transfer of ownerships, right? it would kind of look like the board of Visa, where you buy a seat from somebody, you sit on the seat, you get a vote, you steer it for as long as you want to, and then when you no longer need the seat, you sell it. It's something like that. But instead, the top level of the Bitcoin game, where you go from being the tokens to the code, immediately steps into an anarcho-syndicalist guild structure. And that all comes down to loose association, loose consensus, forking. Everybody's free to do anything they like, and then you find consensus in areas where people like each other and want to work together, and the entire thing is completely spongy and emotional. And it's a terrible fit for the basic style of libertarian thinking. There are no property rights to operate the Bitcoin system. There's only a loose consensus among a set of developers. The set of developers are constantly operating by going around basically like people sharing a squat, asking whether the people upstairs would mind doing their dishes. You know? There's just no authority in the system. There's no transferable authority. There's no transferable right. There's no delegatable right. There's just no structure at the top other than how people feel about each other. And in that sense, it's anarchist. And the mismatch between these two things is the soul of Bitcoin's trouble.
So the mismatch. Why can't that mismatch? Which I see the conflict there. Why can't that match be a perfect combination? That's the recipe for success.
Because the libertarians have no social skills. They don't know how to operate in anarchy.
Oh, so you think that the social problems will overwhelm the context?
Have overwhelmed, past tense, right?
Well, I mean, it's debatable. I think it's
libertarians.
It's still functioning. It hasn't forked. It hasn't had a bad.
Oh, it's static, right? It's exactly where it was. It's not really evolving or changing.
Well, that's not true. I mean, there's been releases. There's a lot of new things coming down the pike this year, actually, just now, that are enabling, for example, Lightning Network.
Tiny incremental changes, right?
Yeah, because it's an existing money system, so they can't.
No.
That's not why.
No, the incrementalism is because there's no central power base that has the ability to make decisions.
But maybe that speed is just right in order for success.
Sitting duck, right? Sitting duck. Compared to hard capitalist market-based enterprises that make strategy, that make decisions, that put the foot down on the pedal, that raise capital to implement features, do the rest of this kind of stuff, the Bitcoin system is a sitting duck. It's got the agility of a tortoise on its back.
So Bitcoin.
Let me give you a specific, right?
Sure.
Bitcoin is now essentially operated by the Chinese government.
Oh, well, let's get to that in a second. Let's get to that in a second. So what I was going to say is that Bitcoin sort of supporters, experts maybe, they claim, and I think there's a good point to be made for this, that Bitcoin's primary advantage is censorship resistance.
It's run by the Chinese government. Okay,
so now you don't believe that it's decentralized. You believe that it's totally centralized now, and it's not censorship resistance.
There are 9 miners that control 90% of the network, and they're all in an authoritarian state.
It's actually been dropping for the last couple of years, and it's below 70%.
Below 70%.
Yeah.
Right? Below 70%.
So what is
good. That's well over 50%. 70% is more than 50%, and miners can't hide because they need a gigabit of bandwidth and a megawatt of power.
Right. So what's the risk of these Chinese mining operations? I mean,
Bitcoin's security model is that it's decentralized. When it ceases to be decentralized, it ceases to be secure. End of story.
But is that really centralization is the question?
Yes, of course it's centralization. They're all in the same authoritarian country. If the Chinese government decides they've had enough of this stuff, they'll start reverting transactions, and there's nothing anybody can do to stop them because they've got more than half the hashing power.
Well, just because you have a 51, more.
Just because you've got more than half of the hashing power and you're all in the same authoritarian state, we're going to pretend it's still decentralized? Don't be ridiculous.
Well, it is possible to.
No. Think about what you're saying.
Okay, listen. A 51% attack.
No. Come on, get over it. It's dead.
Vinay.
It's dead.
Let's actually talk.
No. We are talking about it. Don't weasel on this shit, dude.
I'm not. Okay.
More than half of the. No, wait. Stop. More than half of the mining power is in the hands of an authoritarian regime. End of discussion. It's dead. It's not decentralized.
Well, it's first of all, 51% attacks cannot be done secretly, or everyone will know this. You can't.
It changes nothing.
It does, because you can't.
No,
can't
dude, no. Look, the core security model of the system is broken. It's broken because the mining centralized in an authoritarian state. If Bitcoin had been launched with 51% of the miners sitting in an authoritarian regime, nobody would have trusted it on day one, and there's no reason they should trust it now. This is absolutely cut and dry.
I don't agree. How does
I understand, but you're simply wrong.
How do you
not thinking clearly? No,
how do you get away with? Hold on.
No. You're not thinking clearly.
I want to try to think clearly. Help me think clearly.
So follow the logic.
Okay,
right?
the logic.
The whole point of Bitcoin was it was a decentralized network, right?
Go again.
The whole point of Bitcoin was that it was a decentralized network.
Right.
That was the whole fucking point. It is not a decentralized network when more than half of the nodes are in a single authoritarian country. End of discussion. Bam.
So centralization is a vague term. It can refer to a lot of different things.
A single individual in the Chinese government can decide to revert a transaction and get it reverted.
No, because the rest of the network will just
don't bullshit.
They'll fork.
Right, which means that we're back in the same meth Ethereum as in, where every time somebody does something we don't like, we fork the network. So at which point all of the claims about immutability go out the window. This is bullshit. You might as well use Google Docs. You've got the same security model as Google Docs right now.
Well, I'm not sure. I think that's more true.
I understand, but I am. Right? We've got the same security model as Google Docs, which is we'd like a bunch of nice people to make sure that we don't roll the network back. And if they do roll the network back, well, we can always fork the network. That's exactly the same security model that you get with Google Docs. We really hope that Google don't interfere with our documents, but if they do, we've got a backup and we can start another server. We fucked it up completely. This is what I mean about the total lack of agility from the Bitcoin system.
What is the risk of that, of the Google Docs model?
You don't have a decentralized system. You have a centralized system. It's centralized in China.
No, if we were to fork, say, and have a non-China Bitcoin and a China Bitcoin, what is the risk?
Well, look, either the system is secure and decentralized or it's not. It's not secure and decentralized. After you fork away from China, then tell me about the secure decentralized network.
But if there hasn't been a 51% attack, then there's no problem yet. Just because there's a possible problem that we could avoid.
Just because they haven't pulled the gun that we have in our mouth, that doesn't mean there's a problem.
Why is it a gun? Why is it a gun? Look, why is it a gun?
Dude,
what's the death?
Have some morals. Seriously. Right? Do not weasel around the issues of core political freedom in authoritarian regimes.
Well, I think it's horrible.
This is absolutely unacceptable. Right?
I think it's horrible.
We're weaseling around the point that Bitcoin no longer has freedom because they've taken up with an authoritarian regime.
Taken up with? I mean, these are
the network should have forked away from the Chinese miners when they got anywhere near 51%.
But if they're not acting badly.
If they're acting badly anytime their government tells them to act badly, this is ridiculous.
So
seriously,
so the
you wouldn't trust human freedom to the Chinese government? That's the security and integrity of the Bitcoin network are controlled by the Chinese government because they control the miners and the miners control the network.
Only insofar as everyone else is okay with that.
Don't weasel. Really seriously, do not weasel. Have some fucking backbone.
I have backbone. I'm
sticking on this issue. Look, you're sticking to an absolutely ridiculous point because it serves your idea that Bitcoin still has value. But the actual truth of the situation is, as soon as Bitcoin collapsed as a decentralized network, all the people are clinging to is the ghost of something that died when the Chinese took over the network. Get a grip.
Can you say that again?
All that you're clinging to is the ghost of something that died when the Chinese took over the network.
So the risk.
As soon as you wind up with centralized mining, Bitcoin died.
The reason why you believe it's a gun is because of the risk of a 51% attack, which
no. It's not the risk of the 51% attack. It's that a single individual can revert a transaction at will.
That's not really true if you can fork, though.
Yes, right? It is.
Well, it's like Ethereum. I mean, one side of Ethereum reversed something, one side didn't.
Right. which means that instead of having a cryptographically secure network, what we've got is a bunch of clowns at keyboards forking the state of the network at whim.
That's not a whim.
This is ridiculous.
That's
That
not
is
a
not
whim.
remotely the point. This is stupidity beyond imagining.
The
point of these
keyboard
networks is
jockeys
not that you were going to have a bunch of
miners.
keyboard jockeys reverting state on the network every time something happened that they didn't like.
This is
All
not
you're doing is
keyboard
creating
jockeys. It's
star
miners.
chambers.
It's,
All you're doing is creating star chambers. You've
What's that?
completely lost the entire point of these systems.
What's a star chamber?
Okay, what you've created is unelected bunches of goons that decide on what the state will be of the network. There is no rule. There is simply, when something happens that we don't like, we fork. That doesn't work. That is not the point, because human beings are making the forking decisions rather than cryptographic software. So the consensus system is no longer a technical consensus as nodes. It's a human consensus of political actors, at which point you might as well use Google Docs. Have some dignity.
Yeah, I don't know
ridiculous.
if it's possible to do that with mathematical consensus. I mean,
of course it is. All you need to do is ensure that the mining stays decentralized, and that requires using proper hash algorithms.
So,
right?
which kind of
the failure in the Bitcoin system? Bitcoin dies as soon as somebody makes an ASIC, right? Satoshi screwed up the hash algorithm.
Oh, so
if Satoshi had picked a hash, so go back to Vitalik's idea, right? Vitalik's analysis of this is really simple. As long as the most efficient mining node is a laptop that you've already paid for, so laptop that you're already paid for plus electricity overnight generates more value than a custom ASIC with electricity that you're getting for free, right? As long as that equation is true, everybody leaves their laptops open overnight, mining Ether, and as a result, the network stays extraordinarily decentralized and is very censorship resistant. As soon as you've got an advantage towards ASIC manufacturers, you wind up with a concentration because of the capital requirements of ASICs create positive feedback loops, and the result of that is that you wind up with a collapse in the political decentralization that causes the network to be secure, and the network is no longer secure. That's been true for Bitcoin for years. And Bitcoin has got the turning circle of a sodding boat, so the core assumption on which the integrity of the system is built is broken, and rather than having an agile and forceful response to switch mining algorithms to something that was actually decentralized, they cling to the existing mining algorithm, they accept that the miners rule the system, the miners all wind up in China, and the political security of the network collapses, and it's been collapsed for years. And the inability of the Bitcoin folks to get their heads around this is a sign of the political failure of the project, because people are not thinking. It's a real mess. We lost the shot at having that network because it had the political agility of a turtle on its back. So as it fell prey to regulatory capture, first by the miners and then by the Chinese, we should have pivoted away onto better technology. We totally failed to do that. As a result, the system has none of the security promises that it was intended to.
So it's the algorithm being not ASIC resistant enough that you think was the impetus for the centralization of the mining infrastructure.
And once you centralize the mining infrastructure, you've got problem number one. Problem number two is when the mining centralization is then all inside of China, which is authoritarian. So we go through two tiers of collapses. First, we create an oligarchy which runs the system called the miners, and then the oligarchy winds up under an authoritarian regime. It's a disaster. It was obviously a disaster. I told people it was a disaster. Nobody did anything.
I think part of the decrease of concentration in China recently has been the ASIC manufacturing finally reaching the limits of chip technology, and actually it's actually dramatically slowed down in the last, I think it's 8 months or so, where the speed.
The actual fix, right? The actual fix is you have to kill the miners, right? You have to rewrite the algorithm.
So this goes into proof of stake, right?
Rests. Well, no, I'm not sold on proof of stake,
okay.
Right? But you have to throw away the algorithms on which Bitcoin rests and replace it with a hashing algorithm or some other proof algorithm, where the most efficient node is a laptop running overnight on household electricity.
How is there such a thing as an ASIC proof algorithm?
Yeah.
Really?
I certainly believe so. Right? But what we should have had is a strong, muscular Bitcoin foundation that was spending millions of dollars a year searching for that algorithm as a way of doing long-term political protection of the Bitcoin system. The real bug in Bitcoin was that they picked the wrong hash algorithm, and as a result, you got this concentration of power. As soon as that became apparent, you should have put all of the system resources into finding a new hash algorithm. Okay,
my research has indicated that there is no such thing as a ASIC proof, hashing algorithm, and so given that might be true,
Dagger Hashimoto is certainly a massive improvement. right? I think that the Ethereum bet that you can decentralize as far as mining on graphics cards is a fairly good hedge, right?
I don't necessarily agree. I think maybe the lack of ASIC movement in the Ethereum space is because of the announced move to proof of stake, and they just don't want to waste their R&D.
Right. But, if we don't solve this problem, all of these systems are essentially permissioned ledgers. Bitcoin is, to all intents and purposes, a permissioned ledger. You got a dozen actual signers, which are the big mining pools, and everybody else is going to go along with the outcome because they've got less hashing power. That's not at all what this network was meant to be. This network was meant to be 100,000 nodes so that you couldn't physically round people up. Instead, it's 12 or 15 people that you could just go and black bag tomorrow morning to change the network state.
What if there is no ASIC proof algorithm and
these technologies don't work, and we've got to find something new, maybe proof of stake?
Well, hear me out. What if there is no ASIC proof algorithm and ASIC chips become manufactured more and more and become extremely inexpensive to the point where they are installed on everybody's machines of various types anyways?
The 21 model, right? So you're decentralized by mass producing the ASICs.
Right.
Whether or not that works depends a lot on things like cooling.
Like cooling?
Cooling. So you may discover that you can still triple your economic efficiency by, liquid cooling the entire rig in a way which is impractical in smaller installations. On the other hand, you might find that, there are energy density things and it turns out not to work. I mean, it basically comes down to a data center design problem. Because as soon as you've got an economic advantage for the centralized systems, you wind up with the centralization and mining again. Right? And I mean, this stuff really matters. Right? If we had an actually decentralized platform that was actually secure, you could begin to talk about seriously putting up a challenge to, for example, the United Nations. Right? You could do voting, right? You could do voting on the blockchain with statistical proof that you had a representative random sample of humanity with recordings of them answering the questions. You could do voice print analysis. You could take a really decent shot at actually proving what the world thinks about things. But in a situation where governments can get control of these systems anytime that they want to, we can't use them as platforms for doing things like raising the flag on global democracy, because as soon as we put any kind of serious pressure on, the tools will get taken right out from under us.
Why haven't they taken the tools out? Why hasn't China already cracked down on Bitcoin?
Same reason they haven't shot Julian Assange in the head. It's just not worth doing. Right? I mean, Bitcoin isn't really causing anybody any trouble. It's not like there are massive assassination markets for Chinese political leaders being paid for in Bitcoin. It's not like the majority of the international drug trade is using Bitcoin. There's a whole bunch of low-level dealing over whatever today's version of Silk Road is like. And that's all running over Tor, which is infrastructure paid for by the American military, so you tell me what's happening. Right? People have far too much faith in the tools. Right? You only need to read the history of civilian cryptography to understand that hacking people's stuff and not telling them that you've done it is the soul of cryptography. It's just, we haven't yet built a system that really causes trouble. That's why we're all still perfectly safe and happy.
What about when we do?
As I've said for many years, I don't fear the state. I fear that the state will collapse before we've got meaningful alternatives. So I think that either Trump or Clinton runs a decent risk of splitting America like a log. You could wind up with 4, 6, 8 countries coming out of that. You could see annexation of huge areas of the northern US into Canada. You could see the US, wind up with huge areas splitting on the south into Mexico. The coasts could very easily refuse to recognize authority of the other coast. This kind of stuff could really happen. Because if Trump stands up there and decides that he's going to rule America with an iron fist and the Supreme Court, winds up stopping him, you could very easily see state governors getting involved in deciding what's legal and, oh my God, the mess you could see. And with Clinton, even worse. I think Clinton's going to start a second civil war. You'll see the Mason-Dixon line will go up barbed wire. The Confederate flag will become like the official flag of the South of the US, and nobody will say Second Civil War, but de facto they'll split. Because nobody wants to be ruled by America's mother-in-law. And so, in those kind of scenarios, which, to be honest, I think are maybe 20% likely, But in those kind of scenarios, there is an enormous chance that if you can stand up really serious global infrastructure, it winds up being something that the Fortune 1000 use in preference to nation-state currencies. Right? And this is the real game, right? In the event that the nation-states are doing such a bad job of providing services to the real productive capacity of humanity, you wind up with a rapid transfer of authority to whoever is actually providing the utility.
So that's interesting what you say about the state, and I think I agree that in the long term we're going to see some political decentralization this century. But coming back to Ethereum, you were involved in both project management and community development for the Ethereum smart contract system. For my watchers, Ethereum is another cryptocurrency that was based on Bitcoin originally. They made a lot of changes, and it's sort of a different system that's more geared toward smart contracts, which are automated code that, and it does have an underlying value token as well. So how and why did you come to work with Ethereum?
Smart contracts.
You heard about the smart contracts and just looked right into it and contacted them?
Yeah. Because, I mean, in the 1990s, I was a cypherpunk.
Yeah.
And, the concept of smart contracts was well understood, but there was no implementation that was large-scale deployed and worked. So it was kind of like the high watermark was the smart contract kind of splashed up against the wall. Nick Szabo kind of figured it out. A whole bunch of people talked about it, but there was no widely used implementation. Then the tide falls back down again. 9/11 basically breaks that community apart, and then time passes. Then the water rises again. You get another wave. Smart contract is the starting point of that wave, and it's like, right, okay, fine, let's do this.
Unlike Bitcoin, which gained value as a surprise to some in what might be termed an organic way, where the inventor sort of just invented it and was having fun, and nobody really had a price for it, for anything else, for at least a year and a half, I think. The Ethereum was funded through an ICO, an initial cryptocurrency offering that raised around $12 million, I believe, in Bitcoin. So how much was held by the founders, and what are the legal and ethical risks of this new type of fundraising strategy?
It's a good question. I mean, I seem to remember that, I think the foundation had 10% or something of the total pot. And then I think the founders must have gotten their Ether as offerings from the foundation. So I think the split was that everything that wasn't foundation Ether went to the sale, and then founders were granted Ether by the foundation. But I'm not exactly sure how that worked.
The numbers that I found were 16 2/3% total.
So the foundation had 16%.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I can't remember. All that stuff was figured out about, 6 months or a year before I came on the scene.
Yeah.
So I was quite late in November 2014. And all that stuff had already been long argued over and defined, long before I got on there. I mean, the bottom line is that, as long as everybody understands what the nature of the deal is and all the facts are publicly available, it's a contract. They told people that this was going to be the nature of what they were going to do. This is how they're going to issue the tokens. If people wanted to do that, they could bought in. If they didn't, they didn't.
Also on the Bitcoin podcast recently, you revealed the conflict-averse social culture within the Ethereum team, stemming from its creator, Vitalik Buterin, and tied this culture to the failure of Ethereum community figures to warn investors about primary creator of Slockit and the DAO, Stephen Toole, whom they knew to be unreliable or untrustworthy. I want to give a little bit of background.
Well, Helen, to be precise, whom they knew to have completely different values from the rest of the team.
Okay, yeah. I wanted to just let everybody know what the DAO is. It was a smart contract system that was created to be a decentralized venture capital for voting system for funding projects, and it raised, as you said, something around $120 million. But then there was an exploit. Somebody exploited the existing code, drew off a lot of that wealth, which led to a fork in the Ethereum currency. And now currently there are two Etheria. So would you consider that?
I refer to them Ethereum and Etc.
Etc. Yeah, because the Ethereum Classic, as it's known, goes by ETC, which is actually the original blockchain. So would you consider the fallout from this conflict-averse social culture a governance failure? And how does it contrast with Bitcoin's social culture?
Okay, so I mean, Bitcoin is basically run by lawyers, right? The culture in Bitcoin is very legalistic. It's very right wing. It's very libertarian.
Wait, did you say? I didn't hear.
Hard-edged.
It's run by what?
Lawyers.
Lawyers. Oh.
Right? People are very, very legalistic in their modes of analysis. They're not very communitarian. They're very conflict oriented. You know, it's a rough, tough culture, which also explains why it's about 2% female. So the Ethereum culture is much more communitarian, consensus oriented. It's much more tribal. It's much less political.
Can you repeat what you said about 2%? I missed that sentence.
Bitcoin is very, very, very aggressive in its basic political style, right? Interactions between people inside of the Bitcoin community are typically quite aggressive.
Right. And what was this to the 2%? I missed that.
Well, consequently, it's about 2% female.
Ah, right. Okay.
So, you know, in that sort of context, the Ethereum community is much more communitarian. It's much more tribal. It's generally emotionally warmer. It's less political. But part of what goes with that is that we have a culture where we just don't really dish dirt, right? And there's a real kind of, you know, disincentive for people to actually hear what's going on those levels, and it causes a lot of trouble.
Would you say that Ethereum Classic is libertarian or anarchist? And what is Ethereum?
I think there's a lot of wait and see to see where Ethereum Classic or Etc. actually winds up, right? I mean, you know, I think that those guys are in a position where they jumped and then they wait to see who's going to follow them. And it's going to be a while until there's been a bit of a shakeout to figure out, for example, are they going to stand up a foundation of their own? You know, are they going to independently finance software teams to implement changes, or are they going to be point for point compatible with Ethereum just with one patch that handles the, you know, the DAO, all the rest of that kind of stuff? They've also got to make a bunch of decisions about how they're going to handle the value which was transferred in unexpected ways from the DAO. And it's hard even to say that that was stolen because, you know, there's so much of the contractual paperwork around the DAO that says whatever this contract does is final, the code is the law, end of story.
Yeah, you'll notice I used the term exploit.
Yeah, you know, so there's a whole bunch of, God, you know, like you ever do high school chemistry and, you know, you would just kind of screw around and you do it wrong, or you'd throw a bunch of stuff into a test tube and see what happened, and you'd get this kind of noxious black tar stuck to the bottom of the test tube.
Oh, yeah, the sediment, yeah.
Yeah, right. This to me is how this entire DAO debacle feels, right? We had this very nicely running chemical reaction that was all going great. Then we dumped a bunch of random shit into the test tube, baked it to the sides, and now this piece of glassware will never be clean again. I find the entire thing immensely depressing and aggravating. Especially because I feel like I could have done something about it if I'd opened my big mouth early enough. Maybe I could have knocked some sense into people. And because I just didn't feel like I had the right to make waves and didn't feel like it was my show to make noise in, you know, I kept my mouth shut when I should have just been like, oh my God, are you people crazy? Jesus Christ. And maybe something could have been done. So I definitely feel a sense of like, I would not do this again the way that I had done it. And I'm not a person that's given to regret. Normally I do exactly what I know to be the right thing. And in this instance, you know, I don't know whether it is that I didn't do the right thing or whether it was just there wasn't an option on the table. I'm definitely left with the sense of like, oh my God, this should all have been so different.
Yeah, I was going to ask you some of those things that you just answered. So that's a good perspective. It was very illuminating to hear what you said about it because I had that feeling. And of course, as a, you know, Bitcoiner, I, you know, considered that I actually, you know, did imagine that the centralization of the foundation and in the creator of Vitalik Buterin was perhaps more dangerous than the centralization, for example, that you've been calling out in the mining infrastructure in China because it's on the social side?
Well, I mean, this is always a tricky question, isn't it? I mean, Bitcoin's most unique feature is not its technology; it's its absent founder. And that is such a unique historical occurrence that there's surely more mileage in that fact, right? There's no reason at all that Bitcoin couldn't get its shit together, fix the hash problem, kill the miners, decentralize the network, and then proceed to glory. But you'd have to find some way of getting the necessary political, actors together to make that decision and to make it stick.
Yeah, and reaching consensus in Bitcoin is very difficult, as you pointed out.
And this is the problem that we have, right? We build these tools for distributed consensus, then it turns out we can't agree on anything.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, as you said, it's a thorny problem.